Chapter 1: The Discovery. Dr. Amelia Hart. Amelia pulled the lever, bringing the machine to life. Lights flashed, motors whirled, solenoids clanged, creating a strange symphony. She prayed a silent prayer it would work this time. Her grant funds ran out within the next 2 months, and the people with the money demanded results. Results she hadn't discovered working 75-hour weeks. Little sleep, no life. The small gray mouse in the center of the table disappeared, starting the timer. Amelia gasped, not realizing she had held her breath. Large red numbers counted 1, 2, 3. 4 never came. But a puff of pink mist filled the clear plexiglass box on the table. As the cloud faded, Amelia saw the mangled body. Poor mouse would have suffered less damage if a semi-truck crushed it under all 18 tires. Shit. Amelia couldn't help the curse. Another failure. How many more attempts would she get? It's okay, sweetheart. You'll get it soon. Professor Elena Ramirez had the patience of a saint. Amelia's mentor, cheerleader, and PhD advisor. With all of Amelia's failures in the lab, she hoped Elena didn't regret signing off on her degree. What good was her PhD in temporal physics doing her? MIT sent an inanimate object 10 minutes into the future 2 months ago. So why can't I? Sending a living being into the future is a whole different level of complexity. Go home and get some rest, dear. Amelia had nothing but respect for her mentor, Elena. But giving up this early meant admitting failure. Elena had a family to get home to, so Amelia understood her wanting to leave for the evening. Nobody outside of the institute relied on Amelia. You're right, let's get out of here. Go spend time with your family. I will, but you need to get your rest too. Fresh eyes in the morning will find the solution. Good night, Amelia. Good night, Elena. They walked toward the door of the lab together. Amelia switched off the lights, leaving only the glow of the lab equipment to light the room. The colorful flashing lights made it look like she had left her Christmas tree lights on. I need to head back to my office to grab my stuff. You go on ahead. I'll see you in the morning. Elena's eyes questioned her words. It almost made Amelia feel guilty about the lie. But knowing Elena would be home with her family soon made up for it. Plus, Amelia would enjoy the time alone in her lab. Her thoughts flowed best when alone. She watched Elena leave the building before returning to the lab. After assuring Elena's car had exited the parking lot, Amelia turned the lights back on. The harsh lighting caused Amelia to squint. Temporary blindness after standing in the dark lab. Not the first time she would close the building for the night. Her notebook laid open on the table where she left it. She rubbed her chin while reviewing the calculations for the millionth time. What had she missed? The figures faded in and out of focus as she stared at the page. Amelia contemplated drinking some more caffeine, but her racing heart and twitching eye said no. The answer had to be right in front of her, on one of these pages of calculations. She remembered playing in the corner of her parents' lab as a child, all those long days while Mom and Dad worked. Brilliant physicists in their own rights, working to discover the mysteries of the universe. They died way too young because of the accident. Amelia had been away at school when it happened. A blessing and a curse to live in the shadows of 2 renowned scientists. Either her genes or osmosis from those early years in their labs should provide her with the answers she lacked. Think. She wondered if shouting at herself while alone qualified as a mental illness. If so, then she needed a vacation or a therapist. No, she needed results to get her grants renewed to continue her research. Otherwise, she'd be a failure, working a menial job like her older sister. An easy target to pick on with her small intellect. When had she talked to her sister last? Wait. There it is. Another shout parted her lips, causing her to jump. The link between her mouth and brain broke from the exhaustion. It felt like she shared her head with a stranger. But she found a mistake in the formula on page 437 of her lab notebook. How had she gotten so sloppy? Amelia grabbed a fresh notebook, rewriting the last correct formula. Time disappeared as she redid the math. Before she knew it, 2 hours had passed her by. Missing time. But she had the answer to her time travel formula. She pushed buttons, flipped switches, and typed into the computer, controlling her lab equipment. There'd be no witness this time, but confidence overflowed Amelia, knowing this time it would work. Another hour passed before she checked and then rechecked her settings. Now, ready to repeat the experiment. Amelia skipped to the cage where they kept the mice. She needed only one more for this experiment. This mouse would experience the future firsthand. If only she could go in its place. As she reached the cage, her shoulders fell. Empty. The last mouse she murdered had been the last varmint in her lab. She cursed herself for letting things fall down around her. Maybe she deserved to lose her funding? No. She needed to stop the destructive negative self-talk. Her eyes roamed the lab, looking for a suitable substitute for the fuzzy little creatures. Amelia's gaze stopped at her messy desk, shoved in the corner. There sat her Mickey Mouse alarm clock. A clock where Mickey's arms told the time, and a hammer smashed the 2 bells on top for the alarm. It brought back memories of her youth. Her mother bought it for her when she turned 8 years old, during their first trip to Disney World. She remembered the feel of the powerful Florida sun toasting her skin while they stood in line after line. For what, she didn't remember. One of the few times her parents left their lab to do something as a family. No wonder why her older sister hated them all. Amelia placed the clock in the box where the last mouse gave its life. Quite the irony, substituting Mickey Mouse for a living lab mouse. The stray thought made her giggle, but she didn't know if the thought was really funny or her exhaustion made her giddy. She took her spot behind the LED screen, pulling the lever on her machine. Lay people might call it a time machine, but she knew it was a misnomer. The machine roared to life with strobing lights, clicks, and whirling motors. Before the alarm clock disappeared, the overhead lights dimmed. This had never happened during any of her previous experiments. Large red numbers started counting on the overhead display. 1, 2, 3, 4. The timer hadn't gone beyond 4 seconds in any previous test. Now it stood at 10 minutes as it continued its relentless count. Butterflies flutter in her stomach as 11 minutes passed. She had done it. Or she found a new way to destroy matter and doomed the rest of the universe to destruction. At 12 minutes and 24 seconds, the overhead lights flickered for a second time. A miniature sonic boom preceded the return of the clock. Success. The thought faded as the mist cleared inside the plexiglass box. Amelia expected to see the familiar face of Mickey staring back at her from her cheesy souvenir clock. What the? Her curse faded in her mouth as her eyes registered the strange clock face. Instead of Mickey Mouse, the face of this clock had a bright reddish-purple tint to it. The body of the clock stood higher and wider than the alarm clock she dispatched to the future, constructed of solid metal rather than brittle plastic. As she stared at the device, trying to make sense of it, Amelia remembered seeing something like it before. A precision timing device used by sailors for navigational purposes. She struggled to come up with the name. Chronometer. The future changed her Mickey Mouse alarm clock into a Crimson Chronometer. She reached out to touch it, and it sent currents of electricity through her arm. Amelia jerked her hand back. After staring at it for a few more minutes, she grabbed a pair of rubber gloves, putting it inside of a bag constructed as a Faraday cage. Get a good night's sleep before pondering this mystery in the morning. Amelia took the bag before shutting down the equipment, turning off the lights, and leaving for home. She hoped this discovery meant success for her research and not the end of the universe. Chapter 2: The Temporal Gift. Dr. Amelia Hart. Amelia awoke refreshed the next morning, with full daylight streaming through her bedroom windows. She blinked away the sleep, wondering why she needed her sunglasses. A quick look at the clock showed she had slept past 10 in the morning. Shit. She swore as she leapt out from under the covers, knowing she had already missed a meeting. Not her MO, being this irresponsible. Her eyes drifted across the room, falling on the bag from the night before. Amelia had almost convinced herself that she had dreamed the whole thing. Fighting the urge to get in the shower and start her day, she crept toward the bag. Amelia wanted to see the chronometer again, but she acted like the bag held a poisonous snake. An item more dangerous than a cobra. As she opened the top of the bag, the chronometer seemed to glow. The crimson-colored face sparkled in the daylight. She remembered the feel like an electric shock coming from it as she reached inside the bag. Her hand touched it, but she felt no electricity. Disappointment filled her when nothing happened. It had no power. Only her wild imagination. Amelia pulled the crimson chronometer out of the bag, examining it on all sides. It looked like an antique device, capable of keeping time but possessing no magic. A knob on the back of the clock allowed her to move the hands. She turned it. The world turned into a kaleidoscope of rainbow colors. Her stomach churned as her bedroom transformed into a roller coaster. When she thought she couldn't take the stress anymore, Amelia found herself standing outside her home. She shivered, wearing only the shorts and tank top she slept in. The sun had set. Confusion overwhelmed her because she had just woke up in the bright morning sun. What was happening? Red and blue flashing lights caught her eye. She followed the strobes to the house 2 doors down from hers. Police tape surrounded the home, with cops wandering through the yard. Her first instinct was to draw closer, but then she remembered her state of dress. From her distant perch, she watched paramedics wheel a gurney out the front door. They weren't in a hurry, and the patient had the sheet pulled over their head. 2 burly police officers dragged a large man out in handcuffs. He struggled and swore at the cops. They muscled him into the back of a cruiser, with little care for his well-being. Amelia remembered meeting the woman a month ago, when she first moved in. Her name had been June, and she spoke about her divorce from a violent man from out of state. She had moved to Amelia's neighborhood to escape the beatings he had delivered. This had to be a dream. She must have fallen back asleep, because none of this could be happening. As the thought faded, the rainbow kaleidoscope returned, dragging her back onto the roller coaster from hell. Her stomach flipped inside her gut. Boom. After the deafening noise, all movement stopped. Amelia leaned to the side and puked on her bedroom carpet. As the nausea faded, she noticed the bright daylight streaming through the windows, her bedclothes, and the crimson chronometer. She sat on the floor with her heart thumping in her chest, waiting for the spinning to stop. Not knowing what to make about the strange vision, Amelia cleaned up the mess and herself. She hoped to lose herself in her work, forgetting the strange morning. A nightmare. She drove the familiar route, examining the strange memories. The experience felt so real, shivering from the cold while wearing her PJs. As her mindless commute continued, Amelia spotted a large black SUV in her rear-view mirror. It followed her through the next 3 turns and through a yellow light. A car swerved around the SUV, laying on its horn. Her heart raced. All the windows, including the windshield, had a dark tint, blocking her view inside. At the last turn before the lab, the truck turned the opposite direction. She chuckled, realizing how silly she had been. Pure coincidence. The sun warmed her face as she walked toward the building. It calmed her nerves after the insane morning. Amelia couldn't wait to get back to work. Put the oddness of the morning behind her. She needed to order more mice first thing. If she could repeat the experiment on a living creature, she'd be famous. And pull in a record amount of grants. Working banker's hours today? Of all the days to run into Elena. Her face turned pink. Sorry. It has been a crazy morning. It's okay. I'm not your advisor anymore. I hope you're okay. I'm fine. But I should probably give up the late-night pizza before bed. They shared a laugh together, but Amelia couldn't help hearing the nervousness in hers. She thought about telling Elena about the Crimson Chronometer. Something stopped her before she did. Guess I better get to work. I'll stop in later to see how you're doing. You're going to figure it out today. I know it. Amelia plastered on her best smile, hoping she didn't look insane. She questioned if she had lost her mind. The day passed in a blur. She forgot about the lab equipment surrounding her, focusing only on the chronometer. Amelia hadn't remembered packing it, but she found it sitting in the bottom of her backpack. Strange. She poked it, took every measurement she could think of, but found nothing unique about the device. No new visions or feelings of electric shock as she handled it. Maybe the whole thing had been a dream? A nightmare she wanted to forget. What Cha got there? Alina's words caused Amelia to jump. Her heart thumped in her chest as she locked eyes with her mentor. Before she could answer, Elena spoke again. Are you okay? You look pale. Amelia had to admit that she felt awful. She couldn't confess her weakness, even to Elena. Grant funds were too competitive. I slept like crap last night. Just feeling groggy today. I'd say since you're playing with an antique. Where'd you find that chronometer? In the back of a storage closet while I was looking for supplies. I'm admiring the workmanship. She didn't like to lie to Elena, but the truth sounded insane. Saying she exchanged her Mickey Mouse alarm clock for it in the future would have gotten her locked up in the loony bin. It is a beautiful piece of equipment. But you should use caution with hidden artifacts. Some of them could be dangerous. Yes, you're right. I'm going to head out early and get a good night's sleep. Good idea, Amelia. You look worn out. Have a good night. Thanks, you too. Amelia waited until Elena left, before packing up the chronometer and running out of the building. Her breathing rate sped up as she sprinted for the exit. She kept her eyes forward, not looking back. Escaping with the chronometer became her only goal. As she reached her car, Amelia breathed a sigh of relief. Now to return home to investigate it further. She eased her car out of the parking lot, distracted by thoughts about the chronometer. Traffic moved at a steady pace between the many traffic signals. Each break gave Amelia a chance to develop her test plan. Amelia glanced in the rear-view mirror as she took the right at the last light before her neighborhood. There she saw the behemoth flat grille of the black SUV that followed her out of her neighborhood during her morning commute.
Chapter 3: Shadows of Interest. Agent Nathaniel Kane. Nathaniel knew the phone ringing this early in the morning only meant bad news. No decent person called before 9. Yeah. He made sure the aggravation came through in the tone of his voice. We recorded a temporal anomaly this morning. It needs to be investigated. His boss, Vincent Blackwell of the Temporal Syndicate, came across just as gruff as Nathaniel. Of course, he never seemed happy. His mother must have dropped him on his head as a baby. Where was it? I've already sent the address to your phone. Get back to me once you know something. The line went dead. Nathaniel plugged the address into the map app, following it across town. He found a neat but modest suburban home belonging to a researcher named Amelia Hart. A recent PhD graduate with a small grant awarded for her research into time travel. Nothing in the information showed she had made any progress with her research. There's no way she had discovered the secret after all her documented failures. Nathaniel observed the vehicle parked in the driveway. He had arrived before she left for the institute. Reports pegged Amelia Hart as a workaholic, spending day and night in her laboratory. So he had expected to find her down at the lab. Nathaniel continued his research on the woman while he waited. Amelia had a slim, athletic build, with shoulder-length blonde hair. Her driver's license listed her at 5 foot 6 inches tall, weighing 125 pounds. Not a supermodel, but an attractive woman. In his eyes anyway. Better to remain indifferent. A slamming car door tore him away from his laptop. He cursed himself for getting sloppy and almost missing her departure. No excuses for his lapse in attention. As she pulled out of her driveway, Nathaniel eased out behind her. He hated the big black Cadillac Escalade the syndicate gave him, because it stuck out like the proverbial sore thumb. They didn't see the problem with the flamboyant ride, so he was stuck with it. Amelia headed straight toward the institute. Not a surprise. With light traffic on the road, it became hard for Nathaniel to remain hidden while tailing her. Between her sudden erratic driving and the look in her eyes reflected in the rearview mirror, he knew she made him. Shit. At the last intersection before the lab, he turned in the opposite direction. Nathaniel hoped she'd forget about the big black SUV, or he'd have a hard time following her later. He took 2 more turns, stopping a block away, out of sight from the main road. There had to be another way to get the information he needed. She created an anomaly, and the Temporal Syndicate needed to know how. Time travel needed protection from the whims of rogue operators. Think Nate. Sane people talk to themselves too. As he questioned himself, an idea hit him. He called Vincent to put it into action. Thanks for taking the time to see me, Dr. Ramirez. I'm sure running the Temporal Dynamics Institute is a full-time job. He chuckled at his own joke, trying to lighten the mood. She glared at him with dark, piercing eyes. Who are you again? Get to the point. What can I do for you? Ouch, someone woke up on the wrong side of the bed this morning. He doubted she ever woke up happy, judging by the sour look etched into her face. My name is Paul Jones, and I represent the Temporal Syndicate. We're interested in Dr. Amelia Hart's work. How are her experiments coming along? He mixed one truth in with the lies. She stared him down, telling him to get lost, without words. Nathaniel pushed too hard in his quest for answers. You may file a FOIA request, like any member of the public, Mr. Jones. If there's nothing else, then I'll ask you to go. I have a full schedule today. Anger bubbled up within, but he swallowed it down. He'd find another way to handle these women. Get the answers he needed. Violence wouldn't solve all problems. Use your brain to make better choices. Nathaniel reminded himself of these truths. I'm sorry to bother you, Dr. Ramirez. I'll send my grant proposals through the proper channels next time. Have a wonderful day. She dismissed him with a wave of her hand. Arrogance mixed with bitchiness, all in one package. Ever since the call from Vincent this morning, Nathaniel had made one mistake after another. He needed to exercise caution before somebody discovered his true mission. Once he reached the hallway, Nathaniel replaced his suit jacket and tie with a white lab coat. A disguise to blend in at the institute. Another graduate student roaming the halls. He didn't have to wait long before Elena Ramirez stormed out of her office. She led him straight to Amelia's lab, on level 3. Before the door shut behind her, he saw Amelia hunched over a crimson-colored object on her workbench. What the hell? With all the lab equipment surrounding her, Nathaniel couldn't figure out why the object on the workbench held her attention. He'd love to get inside her lab and look around. But getting caught would create unwanted attention that even Vincent couldn't smooth over. Better to head outside undetected, and monitor Amelia without scrutiny. The search bots would track anything Amelia published in the meantime. Scientists needed to publish to keep the money people happy. Nathaniel had parked his oversized SUV in the back corner of the parking lot. This perch gave him a clear view of the main entrance to the institute and Amelia's car. He did the best job of hiding in plain sight he could with this behemoth of a vehicle. Nobody understood stealth at the Temporal Syndicate. With her reputation, he figured he would be stuck waiting forever for her to leave for the day. But she strolled out of the building, clutching a backpack, as the sun set. Amazing luck, considering she headed into work after lunch. He waited for her to get in her car before he started the big 8-cylinder engine in his rig. With her car running, she'd be less likely to notice another starting across the lot. She looked disheveled, so she might miss a semi starting its engine in the neighboring parking spot. Traffic moved at a steady pace as Amelia drove toward her home. Nathaniel maintained distance, using other vehicles to mask his presence. He wanted to avoid getting noticed by an amateur again. A serious blow to his ego. As they made the last turn before Amelia's neighborhood, he noticed her eyes lingering in her rearview mirror. Shit. He swore as he realized he messed up again. The option of blending into traffic disappeared once they entered Amelia's development. They turned onto her street, and he tried to hang back. Nathaniel had no other plan. Flashing blue and red lights surrounded the home, 2 houses down from Amelia's. They hypnotized him as he continued down the road. Police vehicles, a crime scene investigator van, and an ambulance blocked the way. Amelia stopped to talk to an officer blocking the road, and he waved her into her driveway. A flash drew his eye to the sidewalk on the opposite side of the street. There he saw Amelia Hart, dressed in a tank top and shorts. He spun the other way, watching her walk into her home, fully clothed. When he turned back to the woman on the sidewalk, Nathaniel watched her disappear in a flash of light. What the?
Chapter 4: Pursued by Shadows. Dr. Amelia Hart. After tossing and turning for hours, Amelia rolled out of bed. She put her fluffy robe over her tank top and shorts before plopping down on her sofa, staring at the chronometer. A cursed object, foisted into her hands to ruin her life. Amelia realized how foolish this sounded, but couldn't find another explanation. The vision of her neighbor's death started this spiral. Now a strange man in a midnight-colored SUV followed her everywhere she went. Amelia had peeked through the crack in the curtains each time she passed them, expecting to see her pursuer waiting for her. Deep down, she knew he wouldn't have given up yet. Not until he got his hands on the Crimson Chronometer. She needed to figure out how this thing worked while keeping it out of the wrong hands. Time travel needed protection. Doubt crept in, not knowing if her hands were the righteous or capable ones. With her thoughts distracted, Amelia reached for the device. She felt outside of herself, observing her hands grasping the chronometer against her will. Her mind screamed stop. But her body remained powerless to obey. A strange warmth radiated from it as her hands closed around it. Her stomach flipped as the rainbow bridge surrounded her. Amelia wanted to curse or scream, but a strange pressure gradient made it impossible. The roller coaster dropped, spun, and looped without warning. No other experience could describe the feelings of her trip. When the world returned to normal, she stood in a dark parking lot. Her robe provided some protection from the cold, but it bit at her face. The empty lot triggered no recognition. The same huge black SUV who followed her to the institute sat in the far corner. Not knowing the rules governing this vision, she walked across the void to investigate. She noted nothing prevented her from moving toward the vehicle. Amelia hoped to discover the identity of this man, stopping his pursuit. Step after step, she closed in. Stop. Leave me alone. The loud voice froze her mid-step. It sounded familiar, but it took her a second to recognize her own voice coming from outside of her body. She sprinted toward the SUV. As she rounded the corner, Amelia watched as her doppelganger fought with some strange man. He tried to wrestle her into the open back door of his vehicle. Without a second thought, Amelia turned into a linebacker, blindsiding the stranger trying to kidnap her. He gasped as she collided with his back, knocking the threesome. Or was it only two? To the ground. She attacked like a badger, forgetting the 2 years of jujutsu she took as a teenager. Her future self broke free as she pummeled the unsuspecting attacker. He curled up in a ball, gasping with every strike she delivered. She stood, kicking him in the head until his body relaxed. A look of terror spread across her face. Well, future her, Amelia guessed. This may create a massive paradox, but she had to save herself from this threat. Of course, she might have just made things worse. The thought made her head ache. If you want to live, you need to go now. She chuckled to herself as she watched herself run toward her car. It hadn't been quite the same quote from Terminator, but she didn't need her future self hanging around. The man groaned, rolling onto his side. Amelia prepared for another attack. Okay, I've had enough. I couldn't take you anyway without causing a nasty rip in time. He spit a wad of blood on the ground. Based upon his words, she knew this wasn't a random attack. Somehow, he knew about time travel. Who are you? What do you want? What difference does it make? That machine is dangerous. People won't stop pursuing you until they control it. I won't be the last, but I can protect you. That's what I was trying to tell you. His words didn't correspond to what she had witnessed. He struggled to his knees, trying to get his feet underneath him. She wound up, kicking him in the face. A crunch proceeded as his body collapsed to the ground. As she turned to run away, a boom shattered the night, surrounding her with colored lights. All movement ceased after she hit the floor of her living room, clutching the Crimson Chronometer. She tossed it across the floor as her stomach erupted, worse than any stomach flu she ever had. Shivers racked her body. Amelia didn't know how much time had passed. She woke in a mess of vomit and sweat. The stranger's identity eluded her, even if she disabled him. But now she confirmed that the Crimson Chronometer allowed one to travel in time. Not a vision or a strange dream. She wondered if her future self had any other answers, or remained as confused. The first light of day shone through a crack in the curtains. She cleaned her living room, stopping to peek through the curtains. Amelia expected to see the SUV parked outside of her house, but the street remained empty. A puke-covered floor, along with her pain, prevented her from chalking the entire episode up as a fever dream. But the mess, along with her bruised body, provided proof of the struggle with the stranger. To maintain her sanity, Amelia locked the Crimson Chronometer in her safe before heading to the institute. She would spend the day lost in her work, avoiding any thoughts about this cursed device. Her seatbelt grabbed as her car's automatic braking system engaged. Amelia had her eyes focused on the rearview mirror, forgetting to watch the traffic in front of her. She needed to get her mind in the game to figure out this problem. Focus, Amelia. The pep talk fell on deaf ears. When she reached the institute, Amelia drove around the entire lot before parking. She watched a couple of fellow researchers frown at her. Screw them if they didn't understand. Nobody chased them, trying to kidnap them. Amelia stormed through the door, locking herself in her lab. She gasped, catching her reflection in the shiny surface of the temporal spectrum analyzer. A haggard woman stared back. Amelia pulled an energy drink out of her fridge before collapsing in a chair. Amelia, are you okay? Elena's voice startled her. She knocked the opened energy drink on the floor, spilling it like her vomit earlier in the morning. Amelia remembered locking herself away in her lab right after arriving at work. But then nothing else. The stress of the last few days must have caught up to her, causing her to drift off to sleep for a few minutes. You look terrible, and you missed the staff meeting. You locked your door. What's going on with you? The staff meeting happened at the end of the workday. Had she slept the entire day in her office chair? She shrugged, shaking her head, not knowing what to say. Her life had become a strange nightmare. Elena turned her back, shaking her head. Amelia resisted the urge to fill the silence. Better to keep quiet, so her mentor didn't have her committed. Any explanation she had sounded insane. You realize your grants are all coming up for renewal next quarter? Yes. I'm sorry. I think you should take some time off and get your head together. I love you like a daughter, Amelia, but I can't keep making excuses for you. Someone has been calling non-stop from the Temporal Syndicate inquiring about your work. What's going on with you? I don't know. Elena frowned, driving a wave of guilt through Amelia. She hated to let her mentor down, but she had no answers to give. It's late. Go home and rest. Come back in 2 weeks, ready to go. Understand? Amelia nodded, not trusting her voice. Elena shook her head, muttering as she walked away. She wondered if she would see her mentor again, or if the fabric of time would get shredded in the meantime. A tear forced its way out of the corner of her eye. Her eyes roamed the lab as Amelia gathered her things. Elena hadn't sent security into the lab to escort her out, so she took it as a positive sign. She reached the front door of the institute, finding it dark out and the parking lot empty. Dread turned her stomach as she stumbled toward her car.
Chapter 5: Unveiling the Syndicate. Agent Nathaniel Kane. As Nathaniel returned to consciousness, he remembered their brief conversation. Mixed feelings about Amelia Hart filled his aching head. He had to respect her tenacity, fighting him off while he tried to kidnap future her. Thoughts about the time anomaly caused his head to pound harder. The Syndicate trained him to act as their vicious enforcer, doing everything they commanded without question. She took him by surprise, appearing as both a past and present version of herself, packing a wallop. Even if some would have called her attack a cheap shot, kicking a man when down. Blood from his broken nose dripped down his throat, choking him. He spit a disgusting wad on the ground, realizing how bad he looked. Her stubbornness pissed him off. Nathaniel was trying to help her, even if she couldn't see it. Maybe he should have handled it differently, but time was of the essence. If he didn't act fast, Vincent would. He ran the end of his conversation with Vincent through his head one more time. If you don't get the Crimson Chronometer away from that bitch before the end of the week, then I'll call in a kill squad. Then you'll lose the bonus. Understand? Vincent Blackwell wouldn't hesitate to kill Amelia, or anyone else unfortunate enough to get in his way. The control of time belonged to Vincent and the Temporal Syndicate alone. Nathaniel feared the man, even though Vincent had taken care of him after the death of his parents. After all these years, Nathaniel questioned Vincent's altruistic motives. What had he missed as an impressionable teenager? Had he taken Vincent in to gain access to his parents' research? He limped toward the driver's side of the Cadillac, planning his next move. Nathaniel knew for certain that the Crimson Chronometer controlled time, but he needed to know the total scope of its power. A tiny voice inside wondered if his parents had stumbled upon this device before their accident. Their notes referred to discovering a mysterious instrument. Nathaniel never found it after their death. If they had survived, his life would have been different. After cleaning himself up as best as he could, Nathaniel headed to the Temporal Dynamics Institute. If he saw Amelia in her element, he might convince her to work with him. At least he hoped to avoid another beating, meeting her in a public place. "Mr. Jones, why are you sneaking around by Amelia's lab?" He recognized the bitchy voice from the day before. Elena Ramirez had shown him no love. Only contempt. She was the one person he hoped to avoid, while trying to talk to Amelia. If she attempted to verify his story, she'd discover his true identity. Not a positive outcome for Vincent. "Oh, what happened to your face? Who beat you up?" Shit. If yesterday was strike 1, he just took strike 2 and 3. He needed an explanation before Dr. Ramirez called security. His body wouldn't stand up to another beating. "I was hoping to catch Dr. Hart for a quick chat. We're interested in supporting her work. I thought I was clear yesterday. You need to leave and file your requests through the proper channels. This is a research facility, not a playground for the Temporal Syndicate. Amelia is in trouble, and I can help her. Please let me talk to her." Something registered in her dark eyes, giving him some hope. But then she opened her mouth, shattering any thoughts of progress. "Dr. Hart is on indefinite leave. You need to go." "Security." "Okay, I'll go." "No need to call security. I'm sorry to bother you." Nathaniel held his hands up in surrender. A few heads had turned when Elena yelled for security. No need to attract any more attention. An agent of the Syndicate needed to perform their duties in the shadows, not on stage for everyone to see. He needed to regroup, develop a new plan before the situation got away from him. He sat in a corner booth with a gallon of sugary cola and a bushel of fries, hoping the caffeine would revive him. The sweet and salty snack satisfied his growing hunger. With all the running around, he hadn't eaten for hours. Nathaniel couldn't remember the last time he had slept. These weaknesses had affected his judgment. The events from the last few days, along with the possible connection to his parents' death, swirled through his head. He tried to make sense of the confusing blur. Each time he thought he pinned down an answer, only resulted in a new set of questions. What a mess. A complete shit show. 20 hours had passed since his beating at the hands of Amelia Hart. He didn't blame her because of his perceived threat, but he needed to get her to listen to him. Vincent would make good on his threats in a couple of days if Nathaniel failed. Nathaniel ate another fry, wishing he had gone to the restaurant with the red-headed girl, rather than the one with the golden arches. Then he could have dunked his fries in some frozen ice cream-type dessert. Not real ice cream, of course. Still, a satisfying thought. His phone rang, breaking the trance. Vincent. Time's up. What do you mean? Do I have to spell it out? The kill squad is on their way. Stay out of their way. I still think of you as a son, Nate. Don't do anything that might change my opinion. The line went dead before he could respond. He wanted to scream at Vincent, but knew the outburst would do no good. Vincent wanted the device, and now Amelia would die so he could have it. Nathaniel felt powerless, knowing what awaited Amelia. But he buried the feelings, hoping to reach her before the mercenaries. He chucked the rest of the cola and the fries in the garbage as he stormed out the door. When he got to the Cadillac, he opened the rear hatch, checking his weapons. A Glock 21, along with a Mossberg tactical shotgun, completed his armament. Nathaniel checked the load on both, grabbing the extra magazines for the pistol and the box of shells for the shotgun. It would have to be enough to defeat the thugs sent by the syndicate. Balancing the fine line between stealth and speed, Nathaniel arrived at Amelia's house before the kill squad. A typical crew of mercenaries included 5 men, all armed with assault rifles. Either AK-47 or M4 rifles, depending on who Vincent hired. The Temporal Syndicate didn't understand the meaning of the word subtle. Nathaniel thought about knocking on her front door, but he doubted she let him in, armed with a shotgun and a pistol. He didn't need to get beaten up again by a woman. Plus, he needed to get inside if he had any hope of protecting her from the attackers. A quick check of his tools revealed a wave rake. Most cheap household locks would give way in seconds. So he headed toward the back door, shrouded in shadows. Once he got inside, he'd figure out how to convince Amelia he was on her side. He entered through the kitchen, locking the door behind him. It might slow them down, giving him a valuable second or two to defend them. Nathaniel eased down a dark hallway to a lighted room beyond. The floor creaked, putting him on alert, raising the barrel of the shotgun. It's about time you showed up. Amelia stood before him, confusing him with her words. He understood them, but didn't understand why her attitude had changed. Her face looked pale, with sweat running down her forehead. Before he could respond, 2 things happened. The lights blinked out, and the front door exploded inward.
Chapter 6: Allies and Adversaries. Dr. Amelia Hart. Amelia found it hard to get out of bed after her last trip through time. Ever since she fought with the stranger for her life, or was lives the proper term, she knew the Crimson Chronometer enabled time travel. How it worked, she had no clue. Each trip knocked her on her ass. It felt like the worst case of the flu ever. Her head pounded, her stomach flipped, and she couldn't keep anything down. Not even ginger ale. If the things she experienced were about to happen, then she needed to run. Light shone through the cracks in her curtains, so the attack wasn't imminent. But as she tried to stand, she collapsed back onto her bed, dry heaving. The room wouldn't stop spinning. She had longed to travel through time her entire life, but found it a curse rather than the blessing she imagined. Her health declined with each trip, and she didn't know who to trust anymore. The man who tried to kidnap and now claimed to want to help, or her mentor who tossed her away. Amelia rolled onto her side, drifting off to sleep. With a gasp, Amelia awoke from a deep slumber. Confusion fogged her brain as she tried to remember what had happened. As the haze parted, her predicament revealed itself in living color. Shit! She swore, sitting up in bed. The sudden movement resulted in dizziness. Amelia collapsed back into the bed, waiting for the waves to settle. Fear displaced the previous ill feelings, not knowing how long she had slept, or when the things she witnessed during her last trip would occur. So far, everything she witnessed as a time traveler happened within 24 to 36 hours. No one said this rule was firm or if everything she witnessed would happen. This felt like a question for the ghost of Christmas future, not an unwilling time traveler. When she felt steady, Amelia rolled onto her side, easing into a seated position. Her stomach grumbled. She stood without fainting, stumbling into the kitchen to see if her stomach would allow her to eat something. As she passed the living room windows, she saw the fading daylight. Amelia had slept for hours. Too bad it hadn't healed her ailing body. After forcing a couple of slices of toast down and drinking 3 cups of coffee, Amelia almost felt human again. If she hadn't known about the coming danger, then this would have been a decent day. She staggered back to her bedroom, dressing in jeans and a sweatshirt. All she had left on her agenda was waiting for the events she knew were coming. Knowing didn't make accepting them any easier, but she saw no alternative. If she fled, they'd track her down. Amelia placed the chronometer in her backpack, assuring it would be ready when the time came to run. After dark, she watched 2 midnight-colored SUVs creep past her house. They arrived 10 minutes apart. One parked a block away on her street. The other disappeared around the corner. She expected it parked on the street behind her house, but couldn't confirm that without going outside. Not a smart move, so Amelia waited. Time crawled. The idea of a crawling clock made Amelia chuckle, since she had access to a time machine. A device she had no control over, making her ill each time she used it. It felt like hours before the black Cadillac screeched to a stop by the curb in front of her house. The same vehicle driven by the man who tried to kidnap her. This time she knew he came to help her. At least she hoped the vision proved true. She didn't know if she would win a fair fight against him, and didn't want to find out. He walked around the back of her house, entering through the locked kitchen door. Shadows closed in behind him, surrounding them, trapping them inside. Enemies turned into allies. At least for the moment. She met him in the hallway. He raised his weapon as the floor creaked. Amelia forgot about the squeaky board. "It's about time you showed up." The lights blinked out as the front door crashed inward. An intruder, dressed all in black, raised their weapon, prepared to end their lives. Duck. Amelia had already hit the deck, knowing the future. Part of it anyway. The roar of his weapon deafened her. Even knowing he would shoot the assailant, the racket took her breath away. He grabbed her hand, pulling her to her feet. She watched his lips move, not hearing a word he said over the ringing in her ears. They turned toward the back door, where she knew they'd escape. Amelia watched this all happen during her last trip to the future. Almost safe. They reached the opening, finding 2 gunmen standing at the bottom of the steps. Confusion clouded her mind. This way had been clear when she watched the future unfold. "Look out!" Amelia shouted a warning. He blasted the intruders 3 times, slamming the door in their face. "Is there another way out?" "Only the front door." "Shit." He dragged her back toward the living room. The first body blocked the door, leaving it open. Exposed to the world. Gunshots rang out as they neared the door. Her savior fired twice, dropping his weapon on the floor. "Empty. We need to find another way out. They'll kill us or the cops will show up. Neither is an acceptable outcome." She knew he was right but found herself unable to think. Chaos surrounded them. Glass shattered at both the front and back of her home. Smoke reached her nose within seconds. They wouldn't stop until they got their hands on the chronometer. Disposing of the witnesses would be a bonus. Not a pleasant thought when you were the witness. He dragged her down the hallway toward the bedrooms. Amelia wanted to shout a warning. A trap with no escape. But then she saw the flames taking hold in both her living room and kitchen. Both escape routes blocked by walls of fire. By the time the cops arrived, the battle would be over. They'd dig their bodies out of the rubble of her home. They ended up in her bedroom at the end of the hall. The room had 2 windows, one on the back and the other on the far side of the house. He opened the one on the side, drawing a pistol out of a shoulder holster. "Run to your neighbor's house. Don't stop. Don't look back. I'll be right behind you." Amelia crawled through the window, breaking into a sprint once she hit the ground. Gunfire erupted from the window behind her, giving her cover. The attackers wasted no time returning fire. She made 20 steps before looking over her shoulder. Her house blazed, while gunmen turned her once peaceful neighborhood into a war zone. A tear ran down her cheek. Hopeless. The entire episode made no sense because it hadn't turned out this way when she witnessed it. Had something happened to past Amelia to change the timeline? It seemed unlikely since she remained alive. This way. He grabbed her hand, directing her toward the street behind her house. They passed through a treed area, exiting into the backyard of the HOA president. She expected her to spot them, but Amelia saw nobody looking out the windows. How could they sleep with all the shooting going on? The second dark-colored SUV she saw earlier sat parked in front of their house. He guided her to the vehicle, trying the doors. Unlocked. Its key waiting in the cup holder for the attackers to return. Bingo. He started the truck, easing away from the curve. As they exited the neighborhood, Amelia heard the approaching sirens. Someone had called 911. It took them long enough. A half-dozen police cars, an ambulance, and 3 fire trucks headed in the opposite direction. This time, Amelia let the tears flow, mourning the loss of her home and her life. At least, life as she had known it. Chapter 7: The Escape. Dr. Amelia Hart. Shock of losing everything took the desire to speak away from Amelia. The longer they drove in silence, the more panic-stricken she became. She had watched this man save her during her last jump through time, but she knew nothing about him or his intentions. "Who are you?" "My name's Nathaniel Kane. I work for the Temporal Syndicate." Amelia had heard of the Temporal Syndicate before, but knew nothing about them. She didn't know if he was an ally she could trust or someone scheming to steal the Crimson Chronometer. Not a question one asked a stranger, expecting to receive an honest answer. "Thanks for saving me, Nathaniel. You can drop me at the Temporal Dynamics Institute. I'll be fine there." "You can't go there. They suspended you. Plus, it's the first place they'll look for you." Had he been following her? He knew about her suspension when it only happened yesterday. Any thoughts of trusting him fled with this revelation. She needed to escape. A long vacation on a warm beach. "Is the device in your bag?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't play coy with me, Amelia." "The Crimson Chronometer. The device you've been using to travel through time." "How do you know about the chronometer?" "Come on, Amelia. You've been creating temporal anomalies for weeks now. The syndicate sent me to track you." Concern overwhelmed her. Nathaniel wasn't some hero, nor a good Samaritan. He wanted the chronometer for himself. Like the others, trying to kill her. Amelia needed to escape. She needed to protect the fabric of time. Nobody else could. "Where are we going?" "To a safe house. We have about an hour's drive left. Sit back and enjoy the ride." "I need to use the bathroom. Please stop at the gas station." She saw the lighted oasis about a mile down the road. The gas station would provide a way for her to escape. Amelia needed to figure out where to run to. He pulled the large SUV into the station, stopping by the pumps in front of the store. "I'll top off the tank. Don't take too long. They might catch up to us." With a nod, Amelia jumped out of the truck, heading into the convenience store. She purchased a burner phone, noticing the diesel pumps behind the store. A lone truck filled up at the pumps, while the burly driver milled around. With a quick glance out the front windows, Amelia formed a plan. Nathaniel was busy fueling the SUV as the truck driver finished filling his truck. Amelia raced out the back door, catching the large driver before he climbed back inside his rig. "Excuse me. What can I do for you, ma'am?" "I need a ride." He chuckled. "Sorry, ma'am. Against company policy. Call an Uber." "No, you don't understand. I'm trying to escape from my abusive boyfriend. If I don't leave now, then he'll beat me again." She hoped the wear and tear from the last few days made her look pathetic. He squinted at her before looking through the building at Nathaniel. After scratching his head, he responded, pointing at Nathaniel. "That punk." Amelia nodded, not trusting if she would cry or laugh in response. "Okay, get in the truck. I'll get you to safety, young lady." She climbed into the passenger side of the truck, smiling after pulling off the con. The truck creaked and groaned as the driver eased out onto the road. Amelia looked in the side mirror, watching Nathaniel enter the store. He wouldn't find her, and she'd be gone before he figured it out. A perfect escape. "Thank you, sir." "Don't mention it. Here are the rules. I don't want to know your name, and I'm not telling you mine. I'll drop you off at the diner in the next town. It's open 24 hours and always has a crowd. You can call the police or someone else for a ride. We never met. Understand?" "Yes, sir." Perfect, a ride without worrying about any conversation. Time for her to plan her next move. Find the way out of this mess. Amelia watched the taillights of the big truck fade away before pulling the burner phone out of the package. She'd come clean with Elena, accepting her fate as a member of the Temporal Dynamic Institute. They could keep her safe from the syndicate. Her work and the device wouldn't get into the wrong hands this way. From memory, she punched her mentor's number into the phone. "Elena, it's Amelia. I'm in trouble and need your help. I was so worried about you after seeing the news. We can discuss everything once you get here. Where are you?" "A small diner called Charlie's Eats." "Okay, stay put. A car will be there in 10 minutes. I'll meet you at the institute." "Thanks, Elena." "Anything for you, sweetie." She walked inside the crowded restaurant, taking a seat at the counter. They must have decent food, being this full so late at night. Amelia ordered a cup of coffee and a slice of peach pie. The waitress grabbed the coffee from a pot behind her, while the peach pie came from a display on the counter. She found the coffee strong and the peach pie too sweet. Not the best food she ever had, but something to hold her until her next meal. With how upset her stomach had been, Amelia had eaten little. As she took her last bite of pie, a heavy-set man with a black suit and hat walked into the diner. He gave the place a quick glance before resting his eyes on her. "Dr. Amelia Hart?" "Yes. I'm your driver. When you're ready to go, I'll be outside waiting." "Okay." He turned, walking out of the restaurant. Not what she expected. But she hadn't expected people trying to kill her, burning her house down and then kidnapping her. She placed a 20 on the counter, heading out to her hired car. The suited man stood next to a white town car. An older vehicle in showroom condition. He opened the rear door on the passenger side once he saw her. Before she got in, he spoke. "Is your destination still the Temporal Dynamics Institute?" "Yes, that's correct." He closed the door, strolling to the driver's side of the car. As he got in, he spoke again. "We should arrive in about 45 minutes. If you need anything, push the intercom button on the armrest." A tinted partition window rolled up, separating the front and back seats of the car. Another strange turn. She fought the urge to take out the chronometer and jump to the future. Find out how things worked out. A stupid idea Amelia ruled out, knowing she'd get sick afterward. Best to wait until she came face to face with Elena, so Amelia could tell her story. Then they'd come up with a plan. Her eyes grew heavy, listening to the droning of the tires on the road. The third time they blinked, they remained closed as she drifted off to sleep. Chapter 8 Betrayal. Dr. Amelia Hart. Ma'am, we're here. Amelia jerked awake, startled by the driver's voice. She blinked her eyes, forcing them to focus. The sizable building containing the Temporal Dynamic Institute sat before her. An empty but well-lighted walkway separated the parking lot from the door. Thank you, sir. What do I owe you? The bill has been taken care of. Have a pleasant evening, ma'am. His curt tone let her know he wanted to leave. Once she stepped from the car, there'd be no turning back. A stupid thought since she had nothing to return to. No job, no house, no life. Nothing. The Crimson Chronometer took everything from her. As the door shut, the car raced away. She didn't blame the driver, a stranger, wishing she had the option to run away too. The front door to the building opened with her ID, much to her surprise. Elena failed to submit the paperwork confirming her suspension or reinstated her for this clandestine meeting. Both options seemed out of character for her mentor. She found the front desk unmanned and the lobby empty. A security guard sat behind the counter 24 hours a day, assuring no unauthorized persons gained entry. Her stomach churned at this ominous sign. Amelia debated heading toward her lab or Elena's office. She hadn't recalled seeing any cars in the parking lot when she exited the hired car. That cemented her decision, turning for her lab. Her ID granted her access to the lab. Another bit of luck or an oversight on Elena's part. She left the overnight lights on, rather than turning on the full overhead lighting. Best to lie low. Somebody had tried to kill her. Insanity. She put her backpack on the table, resisting the urge to pull the chronometer out. Amelia thought about jumping into the future to find out how the meeting would turn out. The ramifications of these time jumps were still a huge unknown. Plus, the outcome of the invasion of her home hadn't matched her trip to the future. A tear in the fabric of time nobody could repair. How many tears before time collapsed? You got here safely. I had started to worry about you. Amelia jumped at Elena's voice. Her heart pounded as she tried to calm her breathing. She expected her mentor, but Elena had snuck up on her. Even in the middle of the night for this unexpected meeting, Elena wore cleaned and pressed dress clothes. Her proper appearance made Amelia feel like a slob. A result of fighting for her life during the last few hours. Did you bring the device with you? Amelia had no chance to respond before Elena continued. Elena's questions about the device raised her suspicion. What device? Don't play coy with me, Amelia. The Crimson Chronometer. Where is it? She hadn't remembered telling Elena anything about the Crimson Chronometer. As she ran the conversation back through her head, she only remembered saying she needed help. Nothing more. How did she know? Amelia pulled the bag close to her chest. Its bulk comforted her. Is it in your bag? You need to give it to me. Elena stepped closer. A wild look flashed in her eyes. Fear made Amelia back away from her mentor. A woman she had known for years, behaving like a possessed monster. You're scaring me. Don't be a baby, Amelia. Think of the power we'd have. Time would bend to our wills. Give it to me. Now. Amelia hugged the bag to her chest, allowing herself to be backed into the far corner of her lab. She regretted discovering the chronometer. It had destroyed her life. As Elena closed in, the lab door burst open. A tall man with salt and pepper hair entered, pointing a gun Amelia's way. Enough being nice, Elena. It's time to hand it over, Dr. Hart. I will shoot you if you force me to. I told you I'd handle this, Vincent. You haven't handled it yet. It's my turn now. The Temporal Syndicate will be the ultimate keeper of time. Elena's eyes turned toward the intruder, giving Amelia the opportunity to slip away. She never met this Vincent before, but had heard only evil about the Temporal Syndicate. A group of men looking to mold the world in their image through the manipulation of time. Amelia wondered if she could use the device to jump in time, escaping this pickle she found herself in. Vincent, you said we'd work together outside of our organizations. This discovery is too valuable. It's called pillow talk, dear. Things we say to get what we want. Nothing personal. He turned the barrel toward Elena. The gun barked 3 times, dropping her body to the floor. No. Amelia screamed as she watched her mentor's body collapse. No movement, as the puddle of blood ceased growing. One of the 3 slugs tore through her heart. Vincent pointed the pistol at Amelia. She waited for her fate to match Elena's, wishing she had chosen a different path through life. The gun remained silent as the door to the lab burst open a second time. Amelia wished for the return of the armed guard, hearing the gunfire and saving her life. But Nathaniel Kane strolled in, brandishing his own pistol. It's about time you arrived, Agent Kane. I've had to get my hands dirty in your absence. I can see that. Why'd you kill the professor? She didn't understand my grand vision. Besides, who are you to question me? I need you to kill Dr. Hart. We'll frame the scene as a murder-suicide. Disgruntled worker gets suspended, returning to enact her revenge. Perfect, don't you think? Nathaniel winked at her. He kept the barrel of his weapon pointed away. Amelia wondered if the look was a secret message, or his giddiness came from the opportunity to kill her. Vincent, tell me again about my parents. He pointed his gun at the floor, turning toward his agent. The look on Vincent's face changing with the sudden question. Amelia contemplated running, wondering how many steps she'd make before being shot in the back. Nathaniel moved closer to his boss. How many times do I have to tell you? They died in a car accident. I stepped up and took you in when you had no one. Now do what you're told. Kill the bitch. In a blur, Nathaniel swung a collapsible baton, striking Vincent on the side of the head. Vincent's knees wobbled as his body thumped to the floor. A combination of confusion and relief overwhelmed Amelia. Now, do you believe me? I said I wanted to keep you safe. We need to get out of here before he comes to. Amelia's eyes ping-ponged between the 2 bodies on the floor and Nathaniel. She wanted to trust him since she had nobody else. But he worked for the Temporal Syndicate. The group trying to kill her. Where can we go? I've got a place no one knows about. A cabin in the mountains outside of town. I can take you there, and you can figure out what to do with that thing. Won't Vincent know about your place? No, I just discovered it myself. My parents had owned it, and it was tied up in a trust. I haven't even been there yet. She stared into his eyes, trying to read the truth. A former enemy, now an ally? The whole thing made no sense. Vincent groaned. We need to get going, unless you want to count on his mercy. He won't change his mind. Amelia took the first step, following him outside. He had a different SUV. The third of the night that she knew of. Nathaniel opened the door for her. She settled into the passenger seat as he drove toward the exit, hoping she hadn't made a mistake trusting him. Chapter 9, Aftermath. Dr. Amelia Hart. Amelia woke to the pleasing smell of breakfast. Her stomach rumbled, reminding her how long it had been since she ate. Bright light streamed through the dirty windows. She eased herself into a sitting position on the lumpy sofa after oversleeping. Oh good. You're awake. I didn't know what you liked, so I got an order of scrambled eggs, pancakes, and a cheeseburger. Figured that would cover the bases. Help yourself. Nathaniel gestured to the takeout containers scattered across the table. When they arrived, it had been too dark to get a good look at the cabin. Now, Amelia could tell the 2-room structure had remained empty for years. Dust covered every horizontal surface. Maybe he had told her the truth about his parents' cabin? He had given her and the device a wide berth while she rested. Amelia grabbed the pancakes, along with a steaming cup of black coffee. The pancakes had blueberries baked inside. Her favorite. No way he could have known. She scarfed them down, not realizing how hungry she had become. Thanks. You're welcome. Have you come up with a plan yet? A man of action, holding her feet to the fire. She hadn't expected a vacation, but longed for some time to think. Amelia shoved the last oversized piece of blueberry pancake into her mouth, delaying her response. Hey, no pressure. But we need to do something. Vincent Blackwell isn't the kind of man who'll just give up. We embarrassed him, and he won't be happy. His words struck a chord with her. Stubbornness prevented her from agreeing. She needed time to form a plan and grieve her mentor, Elena. The Crimson Chronometer gave her access to all the time in the world, but she still didn't have enough. Amelia finished her food, strolling around the room. Anything to ignore her problems. Nathaniel kept his mouth shut, giving her room. Either that, or he tired of talking to the wall. On her fourth lap of the small room, she stopped to fix the crooked book sitting on the bookshelf. Why it gave her fits when the entire place was a mess, she didn't know. It took more effort than she expected to stand the book up. As it moved, creaks and groans came from behind the shelf. She stepped back as the shelf pivoted in, revealing a staircase descending into the earth. A soft glow and hum came from the space below. From the top of the stairs, she couldn't see anything. What's down there? No clue. I told you I hadn't been here before. Maybe we should see. He stepped around her into the gloom of the stairs. Amelia followed, needing to know what sat at the bottom. A mystery. She hoped her curiosity would turn out better for her than it did for the cat. A musty lab, filled with temporal equipment 3 decades old, greeted them. The lab itself, a time machine into the past, filled with equipment she hadn't seen since college. Amazing. Your parents were scientists? Amelia examined the equipment with a sense of nostalgia filling her. If this stuff still worked, then it might be the key she needed to solve her problems. Figure out how to harness the power of the Crimson Chronometer for the good of the world. A burst of static drew her to a television and VCR combination flickering in the corner. Nathaniel stood before it, shoving a tape inside the slot. She hadn't seen one of these since elementary school. The date on this tape is the day my parents died. A man who looked a lot like Nathaniel and a frail-looking woman appeared on the screen. Both sat in front of the lab's workbench. She noticed the boxy camcorder sitting on a tripod in the corner. The latest tech then, but an obsolete antique now. This video is for you, Nate. If you're watching it, then 2 things have happened. Our experiment worked and you survived. We both wish we could be there with you. But that's not possible because of this. He pointed to the workbench. Amelia recognized the Crimson Chronometer for the first time. Questions flooded her mind, seeing them with her device. We found this relic hidden in the basement at the Institute. Neither of us believed the stories, figuring them as myths. But then your mother jumped. 1 second she was here, then she visited the future. All small jumps at first, giving her a glimpse of things to come. Each trip affecting her health. A coughing jag from the woman interrupted the story. He leaned over, trying to help her. She spat a bloody wad into a stained handkerchief. Sorry. Your mother has stage 4 lung cancer. Too many jaunts through time. At first, she suffered from flu-like symptoms. They worsened each time until they destroyed her health. It's a price we shouldn't have paid. The man paused, this time to wipe a tear from his eye. Nathaniel sat transfixed by the screen. As the experiments continued, others discovered what we were doing. We had to move to this remote lab. They wanted the technology for themselves. Anyone who controlled the future ruled the world. A man named Vincent Blackwell left the Institute to start his own group, called the Syndicate. Pure evil. He tried to have us killed multiple times, only escaping because of your mother's time jumps. Coughs racked her body again. They seemed worse this time. Nathaniel's father had a look of concern on his face as he tended to her. Once she stopped, her body slumped in the chair. Spent from the effort. Let me cut to the chase. The only way we can rid ourselves of this cursed object is to hide it 1,000 years in the future. A trip that far into the future is certain death to the traveler. I pledged to make it myself, but your mother has overruled me. She figured her death is imminent because of the cancer. Today's the day. She smiled for the first time, staring into the camera. Without a word, she grasped the device, disappearing from the room. If Amelia didn't know better, she would have thought it was a cheap camera trick. Tears flowed down the man's face. Well, she's gone. Since she hasn't returned, I know her mission succeeded. Not sure how I'll explain her absence to the authorities. Something we should have discussed earlier. I'm not sure what I'm going to do next. Go back to my leadership position at the Institute, maybe. Someone has to assure any future attempts at time travel are handled ethically. Either way, life will never be the same. The video ended with a burst of static. Nathaniel switched off the TV, turning toward the stairs. I'm sorry, Nathaniel. Not your fault. At least now I know Mom died 1,000 years in the future. But Dad was still alive. I don't get it. What were you told? The official word, an accident. They drove down this mountain, the brakes failed, and the car went over the cliff. Fire consumed the vehicle, burning them beyond recognition. I never knew why they were here when we lived 30 miles away. Amelia didn't know what to say to someone who just found out their life was one lie after another. He stomped up the stairs, slamming the front door of the cabin. A combination of concern for Nathaniel, guilt for getting him involved, along with the unknown of the future, consumed her. Amelia didn't want to end up like Nathaniel's mother. But she needed to assure Vincent Blackwell didn't get his hands on the Crimson Chronometer. Chapter 10: Saving the World. Dr. Amelia Hart. Amelia figured she'd give him some time to gather his thoughts before intruding. But a half-hour had passed since she heard the slamming door. He hadn't returned. She climbed the stairs, looking for his help. They'd need to work together to defeat Vincent Blackwell and the Temporal Syndicate. A crafty man who wouldn't go down easy. The spot where he parked his SUV remained empty. Not a surprise, but a disappointment all the same. Amelia pulled out her burner phone, not knowing who she'd call. Once it powered up, she found no signal. With how far they drove outside of the city, it shouldn't have surprised her. Nobody, except for Nathaniel's parents, had ever lived on the mountain. With nothing else to occupy her time, Amelia took her bag into the basement lab. She'd come up with a plan thwarting Vincent while preserving the timeline and her life. A delicate balance. Without Nathaniel and the ghosts of his parents watching, Amelia searched the lab. Besides the video they had watched, she found another half-dozen tapes. All labeled with various dates before the one Nathaniel played. If she couldn't find her answers elsewhere, she'd return to the tapes. Find out what experiments his parents tried. A cabinet in the corner held dozens of laboratory notebooks. Either of his parents' names written on the covers of each. Amelia picked one with his mother's name, dated 6 months before her disappearance. The writing started out as a neat script, documenting her jumps into the future. Her first trip of only an hour into the future, progressing to a week by the end. Each entry became sloppier than the last, until her writing devolved into unrecognizable chicken scratch. Clear factual text turned into rants of paranoia. Like a macabre Rorschach test, red splotches obscured the writing in the last half of the notebook. Fatigue, aches, and nausea grew with intensity the further ahead she traveled. At one point, she spent a week in bed recovering. An interesting story, but nothing Amelia could use to stop Vincent. If anything, time travel robbed her of her health and drove her mad. A complete breakdown of mind and body. Not what Amelia wanted to hear. She returned to the shelf, grabbing a notebook with his dad's name on it. This covered a similar time frame as his mother's had. His last written record. The earliest entries didn't mention the chronometer. Amelia had to fast forward a month to find his first. His words tinged with anger after discovering his wife's secret. She finally confessed her find after he confronted her about another unexplained illness. His words documented their testing in scientific terms. No crazed paranoia. They measured the temporal waves emanating from the device, like the ocean crashing on a beach. She hadn't measured the changes with her modern instruments, so she reached for their analog meter. It took her a minute to remember how to use the device. Last time she used an analog meter, she had been in a college lab course. Sure enough, the older analog device read the waves as described. Her digital instruments missed them, robbing her of a true understanding of the chronometer. Amelia pushed the notebook aside, helping herself to the antique equipment. Each measurement revealed a new characteristic she hadn't understood before. Her understanding of the manipulation of time became clear as the afternoon progressed. Nathaniel's dad's words helped fill in the blanks. But she still had questions. There had to be a way to control the device, locking out those with evil intentions. Her stomach growled. She needed a break. Step away from the problem to gain some clarity. Something she did in college, but a lost habit after graduation. A reason she suffered from the ill effects of stress from her research. She found the cheeseburger sitting in the fridge, along with a six-pack of cola. Not the healthiest meal, but she lacked any other options. Nathaniel hadn't returned yet. Had he forgotten about her? Maybe he visited the scene of his parents' doom? The thought of being left alone made her stomach flip. A microwave the size of a compact car sat on the counter. She warmed the burger in the machine, marveling that it still worked. Got to love the technology of the 80s. After satisfying her hunger, she moved to the shower. Day grew to dusk, and those final answers she needed laid just out of reach. She could think while addressing her physical needs. Mindless activity always brought answers. Steam filled the bathroom while the scalding water flowed over her naked body. She had no clue how long the hot water would last in this long-abandoned cabin. Take advantage of it before it disappeared. The measurements and the notes from the notebooks swam through her head. An answer waited for her to discover. In theory, she thought she knew how to control the device now. Pick a specific time to travel to. How to manage the physical effects still baffled her. She longed to know how the device made it into her hands if they had hid it 1,000 years in the future. A voice in her head told her they failed. That's how. Too depressing. Amelia found a pair of sweatpants and a sweatshirt in a dresser. They had gotten dusty over the years. 30 years ago, someone washed them before putting them away. A better option than the clothes she had worn the last 2 days. The bang of a car door jolted her from her daydream. Nathaniel had returned. She smiled as she walked toward the front door, knowing she wasn't alone. As she approached the window, Amelia saw Vincent Blackwell strolling toward the front door. A second armed man followed close behind. Shit. Amelia turned and ran down the steps. No time to plan or try to come up with another solution. Only time to act. She grabbed the Crimson Chronometer, spinning the dials while hoping for the best. Amelia almost had everything set, but then a voice interrupted her. Amelia, don't do it. You've lost. Give me the device and I'll let you live. Vincent stood in the lab, pointing his pistol at her center mass. Close enough where he wouldn't miss. No chance she could activate the device before he ended her life. A regular Mexican standoff. I've got nothing against you, Amelia. I just want the device. You killed Elena. True. But she got in my way. Don't get in my way, Amelia. His gun remained steady, pointing at her chest. She remembered how casual he had been killing Elena. If she complied now, she might stop him later. Wishful thinking. As she debated with herself, a gunshot rang out from upstairs. Vincent turned to look, giving Amelia the time she needed. She gripped the chronometer in one hand, reaching for Vincent with the other. When she made contact, she pressed the button, sending Vincent and herself on a one-way trip through time.
Chapter 11, Out of Time. Agent Nathaniel Kane. After hearing his dad's story about the Crimson Chronometer, he had to leave the cabin. It felt claustrophobic. That cursed object stole his parents, placing him in the hands of Vincent Blackwell, a man who claimed to care about the orphaned boy after turning him into an orphan. He drove an hour to the nearest bar, a dive he wouldn't frequent before getting drunk. This day turned into one of the lowest of his life. Nathaniel needed to drink and forget his pain. Whiskey neat. After paying the bartender, Nathaniel took his drink to a corner booth. His eyes swept over the drunk losers, drinking in the middle of the afternoon. Had things gotten this bad, turning him into one of them? He downed the glass in one gulp. Warmth flooded his body as the poison crashed into his gut. His uncle drank himself to death before his parents' death. He remembered how upset his dad had been, swearing he wouldn't touch the stuff. But now Nathaniel sat in this dump, one whiskey down, with a second sitting on the filthy table in front of him. The first drink had calmed his mind, and he hoped the second would numb the pain. Before he tipped the glass, he reran the video through his mind. His dad's words, along with his mom's obvious illness. Why couldn't he remember her being sick? A thick haze blocked the past from his memory. He remembered the babysitter getting him ready for bed, and then getting him ready for school the next morning. She had become more of a fixture in his life during that last year than his parents. But then she disappeared the day of his parents' death. Vincent Blackwell swooped in like a hero the same day, rescuing him. A fake hero saving him from the fate he created. The memories muddled together, along with a pounding starting in his head. Nathaniel glanced at his second glass, noting he hadn't taken a drink yet. If the alcohol hadn't affected him, then why couldn't he remember the details? He had been 15, a moody teenager, but old enough to understand his desperate situation. Vincent took him away from everything he knew, provided an education, turning Nathaniel into a killer. Those memories were plentiful. His mind wouldn't focus on the events before Vincent took him in. Who could he trust? Amelia's name popped into his mind, answering his desperate question. She tried to flee from him, but he had butted into her life. A cursed object tying the two of them together through all time. Then, when she needed him the most, he ran away, abandoning her to solve her problems on her own. They needed to work together to defeat Vincent and the Temporal Syndicate, an evil group bent on world domination through the manipulation of time. If they got their hands on the Crimson Chronometer, then nobody could stop them. A hopeless thought. He needed to return to her side. Restore both of their lives. As he stood, the room spun. Nathaniel looked at his second glass, finding it drained. When had he drunk it? He had no memory of downing it. Nathaniel made his way to the door, using the bar's elements to steady himself. A bar stool, a chair, a table, the jukebox, a doorframe. Next time, he would avoid the whiskey. He staggered through the parking lot, reaching the driver's side door of his SUV. A familiar voice interrupted his progress. "Hey Nate. You okay?" Nathaniel blinked, trying to recognize the voice. Before recognition hit, a sharp jolt pounded him in the back of the head. His world turned black as his knees gave way. The ground slapped the other side of his head. A groan roused Nathaniel. As he rubbed the growing lumps on his head, he realized the sound of discomfort came from him. His head pounded, fighting off the urge to hurl. The events of the day rushed back at him, sobering him up quicker than a pot of strong coffee. Someone had drugged his drink before knocking him unconscious in the parking lot. He looked around, finding the keys to his truck on the floor as he laid across the front seats. Whoever did this hadn't taken his SUV, but they had taken his phone. Amelia had no phone. With no cell service at the cabin, it wouldn't have helped anyway. He took a quick inventory, noting the impaired feeling had faded. His head hurt, but it wouldn't prevent him from driving. Nathaniel started the SUV, pointing it toward the cabin. He feared what he would find once he reached the cabin. For Amelia's sake, he hoped he got there in time to save her. A quick pat of his jacket reminded him he had left his pistol at the cabin. He opened the console, finding his backup Glock 17 right where he left it. If he required over 19 rounds, then they were both screwed. The longer he drove, the more confident he became in his abilities. He pushed the large SUV faster, not wanting to end up like his parents. At least, not like the official story he had been told. When he got his hands on Vincent, he would demand the truth about their deaths. Afterward, he would kill the man who ruined his life. He reached the single track, winding up the last part of the mountain to the cabin. Less than 5 minutes to go. It had grown dark, so he hoped Amelia remained safe. Walking out on her had been a selfish act. Nathaniel needed to think about others. As he reached the driveway, he saw the black Cadillac SUV parked in front of the cabin. Trepidation filled him. An agent stood by the door. With one smooth practice move, he jumped from the truck, drawing his Glock, shooting. Before the agent's body hit the ground, he crossed the threshold into the building. His pistol led the way. Nathaniel found the first floor empty, leaving only the basement lab to check. He stormed down the steps. Amelia held the Crimson Chronometer, and Vincent stood opposite, pointing a pistol at her. Vincent turned toward the noise from the creaking stairs as Amelia leapt toward him. "No!" Nathaniel screamed. The two of them disappeared before his eyes. He collapsed onto his knees, tears streaking down his face. Time's up. For 2 weeks, Nathaniel kept vigil at the cabin, awaiting Amelia's return. He wondered if his dad would have done the same for his mother, if Vincent hadn't killed him. Nathaniel wanted closure. No, he needed it. The opportunity to avenge his parents' death and save Amelia eluded him. He had disposed of the body, the Cadillac, and cleaned the cabin while he waited. The place looked nice, even if only he saw it. A pleasant change of pace after being Vincent's enforcer for so long. Create something new instead of tearing things down. The time to move on arrived at the start of the 3rd week. No sense waiting any longer for an opportunity for revenge. Even if he felt close to his parents here, Nathaniel needed to get on with his life. Bring down the Temporal Syndicate, destroying Vincent's legacy. How else would he gain any closure? Vincent took his parents and Amelia away from him. Before he left, he packed the kitchen full of canned and dried goods. He left 2 cases of water, along with a satellite phone with his number programmed in it. In case Amelia returned after he left. His gut told him not to bother, but he hoped to see her again. Nathaniel checked the load on his main and backup weapon before locking the door behind him. He couldn't help taking one last look at the cabin before putting his truck in drive. One day he'd return. Now to get the closure Amelia and his parents deserved. Chapter 12, Remembering Yesterday. Nathaniel Kane. 2 years had passed since Nathaniel had last visited his parents' cabin. The grounds of the Eternal House of Rest reminded him of its remote location in the mountains. Fresh air, trees, mountain peaks, all along a country road. He had first come here a year and a half ago to visit a patient. Since then, he hadn't missed a Sunday afternoon visit. Nathaniel wished he could do more, but the Temporal Dynamics Institute covered all her bills through an anonymous shell company. How it worked he didn't know, nor did he care. As he passed through the double front door, the attractive blonde woman behind the counter smiled at him. Everyone knew him here, because he was her only visitor. Had he taken a chance exposing her with his visits? He hoped not. "Welcome, Mr. Kane. Right on time for your visit. Please call me Nate. How's she been this week?" Ms. Du's status hasn't changed. Still hasn't uttered a word. "You sure you don't know who she is?" They asked him the same question every week. He didn't know if they wanted to trip him up or just wanted to start a conversation. Either way, he always gave the same answer. "I've told you before, someone in my church found her in the city. Naked, and clutching that Mickey Mouse alarm clock. They can't make the ride way out here, so I check in on her. She never spoke a word, and they'd like to make sure she's okay. No one wants to see whatever happened to her happen to anyone else." She stared deep into his eyes. The same reaction every week. With a chuckle, she handed over the visitor badge. "She doesn't let that alarm clock out of her sight," Have a good day, Mr. Kane. You too. He let the Mr. Kane slide, like he did every week. Her interrogation felt like a test. Nathaniel never knew if he passed. They always let him through to visit, so he must have. Nathaniel followed the hallway to the end, taking the stairs up 2 levels. As he entered the room, he found her sitting in a chair, staring out the window. She had a death grip on that silly Mickey Mouse clock. He wondered its meaning, and what she searched for over the horizon. After leaning down and kissing her cheek, he whispered in her ear. "Hi, Amelia. Please come back to me. I miss you." Nathaniel didn't know if anyone still hunted her, but he wouldn't reveal her identity to anyone else. Her face still reflected the beauty he remembered, even if she appeared 50 years older than the last time he saw her. He wondered what she had witnessed during her travels, turning her into an old woman. Had she lived a full life somewhere else before being deposited back here? Or had she witnessed true horrors, aging her way beyond her years? Amelia hadn't uttered a word, so he figured he'd never know. Vincent Blackwell never returned. Nathaniel took that as a positive outcome. He longed to have a real discussion with Amelia, finally knowing the details of time travel. For now, it would remain a mystery. He sat in the chair opposite her, giving her the updates he thought she'd appreciate. "I hope you had a good week, Jane. Mine was eventful. Even though you don't know any of these people, I thought you might like to hear about it." Nathaniel always spoke this way to her, in case anyone listened in. It might be paranoia on his part, but he felt the need to protect her. If she thought her enemies were subdued, maybe she'd return. He hoped so anyway. "I've told you about a professor I knew named Elena Ramirez. The institute where she taught established a scholarship in her name after she died. They awarded it to 2 twin girls. A full-ride scholarship for them to study meteorology. Watching their excitement made my week." As he spoke, he watched for any recognition in her eyes. She had either become the world's best actor, or the temporal anomaly had changed her. Never any reaction to anything he told her. Her hands tightened on the alarm clock. The FBI finally finished their investigation into the Temporal Syndicate. Their founder, Vincent Blackwell, disappeared 2 years ago. No one has seen him since. They made several arrests, seized their finances, forcing them out of business. Those closest to Vincent disappeared when the investigation started. Some witnesses reported seeing them, and the FBI is hopeful to make more arrests. A long time to stop them, even with my testimony. Still no changes in her expression. My private investigation agency is doing well. I've got a wonderful office lady, along with 3 other investigators now. We handle cheating spouses, divorces, disability scams, and missing person cases. I look over every missing person case personally. Most times, there's a simple explanation. The one case that still bothers me is the disappearance of a researcher named Dr. Amelia Hart. One day I'll crack her case. Had her eye twitched when he mentioned her name? A sign of recognition, or just the glare of the sun causing her to squint? He needed to know. Did I tell you I looked into the Mickey Mouse alarm clock of yours? Turns out, they haven't made that model since the mid-80s. A classic. If you'd like, I could try to find you a working version on eBay. You seem to like yours, but it doesn't work. What do you say? For a moment, her eyes locked onto his. But then the understanding faded, as she stared off into nothing. He thought about pushing the issue by reaching for her clock. Her grip tightened, almost convincing him she could read his mind. Nathaniel didn't want to stress her, he wanted her back the way she had been. They sat in silence for another half an hour. He ran out of things to say, and she never spoke. His vigil felt comfortable at first, fading into awkwardness. "It's time for me to go, Jane. I'll return next weekend. Is there anything I can bring you?" He smiled, hoping for some sort of reaction. Amelia continued to stare with her blank expression. His shoulders drooped after another failed visit. If the doctors couldn't help her, why did he think his visits would? A frown bent his lips as he turned toward the door. Your mother is alive. The words were soft, but they jerked him back into the room. Did Amelia speak? What? His one-word response came out harsher than he meant it. Those had been her first words, shocking him to the core. He watched his parents' video with Amelia and knew those words couldn't be true. Come on. Don't leave me hanging. That can't be true. Can it? Amelia stared at nothing, clutching her stupid clock. No expression on her face. He felt manic, needing answers. None came. As he bent down in front of her, trying to get a response, a doctor stormed in, pushing him to the side. I'm sorry, Mr. Kane. Jane is overstimulated. You must leave now. The doctor's eyes burned with anger. She pulled a needle out of her pocket, injecting Amelia with something. Her eyes fluttered before slamming shut. Mr. Kane, don't make me call security. He glared at the doctor, watching the rise and fall of Amelia's chest. Nathaniel turned toward the door while her words played through his mind. Your mother is alive.